The sun had just begun to dip behind the hills, casting a golden haze over the winding road that cut through the open countryside. Trees lined one side, fields stretched across the other, and silence ruled the space between. No honking cars, no distant voices, just the sound of leaves whispering to the wind. Luca pedaled slowly, his bicycle squeaking under the weight of an old basket tied to the back. It held a worn-out toolkit, a bottle of water, and a cloth-wrapped parcel, bread and soup for his grandmother, waiting patiently at home. He was 24, but looked older. Life had creased his brow early, not from age, but from worry. Ever wonder what happens when two strangers from opposite worlds collide over a single moment? Since dropping out of college to care for his ailing grandmother, he had taken every job he could find. Gardener, dishwasher, delivery boy. Money was tight, but dignity, that he never let go of. As he pushed through the last turn of the road, something unusual caught his eye. A sleek black car sat awkwardly on the roadside, tilted slightly, one rear wheel flattened against the dirt. Steam puffed gently from the bonnet. A figure stood beside it, pacing. Luca slowed down. A woman, elegant and visibly agitated, glanced up. She wore a sharp blazer, heels unsuited for gravel, and an expression that shifted from frustration to guarded curiosity. Her phone was in her hand, held high, searching for signal. Luca stopped a few feet away. "Everything all right, miss?" She looked at him, hesitated. "Flat tire. No signal. No help. Not all right." He nodded gently and leaned his bike against a tree. "Mind if I take a look?" She narrowed her eyes. "You know what you're doing." "Enough to help," he said with a small smile. "I won't touch anything unless you're okay with it." She gave a reluctant nod. "All right." Luca knelt by the wheel, his hands, dusty and rough from years of work, moved carefully. No spare tire visible. He glanced up. "You've got a jack in the back." "I think so." She popped the trunk. Luca rummaged through, eventually pulling out the necessary tools. He worked quietly, methodically, sweat gathering on his brow. Isabel watched him. She didn't usually talk to strangers, especially not roadside strangers, but something about him was honest. "Where are you headed?" she asked, arms folded. "Home," he replied. "Finished a few deliveries." "You work for a company?" "No, just help around. Groceries, fixing things. Whatever pays." She nodded slowly. "That's rare these days." He shrugged. "Helps keep food on the table." In less than 20 minutes, the spare was mounted. Luca stood and wiped his hands on his shirt. "Should be good to go now." "Not perfect, but it'll get you to town." She stared at the car, then back at him. "You don't want anything?" He chuckled softly. "I didn't stop for money." She reached into her bag anyway. He shook his head. "Truly, just glad you're safe." For a moment, they stood in silence. Two strangers from opposite worlds, bound by nothing but a broken tire and unexpected grace. "What's your name?" she asked finally. "Luca." "Luca," she repeated, as if testing the sound. "Thank you." He nodded once, then walked to his bike and pedaled off into the fading light. Isabel stood beside her car, still holding her wallet, staring at the place he disappeared. Something about that young man stirred an unfamiliar warmth in her chest, like a door cracked open, just enough for light to slip through. She got into the car, started the engine, and drove off, unaware that she just crossed paths with someone who would soon change both of their lives forever. The road behind her disappeared in the mirror, but Isabel's mind was still parked there, where the young man with dusty clothes and kind eyes had changed her flat tire without asking for a thing. She didn't know why she had asked his name. She rarely asked anyone's name outside of work unless it was strategic. But something about Luca had nudged her defenses, like wind finding a crack in a tightly shut window. The drive back to the city passed like fog. Skyscrapers swallowed the sunset, and traffic hummed its constant song. Isabel arrived at her apartment, a sleek, modern space perched above a bustling square, but it felt emptier than usual. That night, as she reheated leftovers and scrolled through emails, her mind kept drifting back to the road. She'd faced countless boardroom battles, negotiated million-euro deals, and led teams across continents. Yet it was the boy who knelt beside her car who unsettled her thoughts. "Why couldn't I stop thinking about him?" she muttered aloud, annoyed. Not because he had fixed the tire, but because he had seen her, not as a title or a powerful figure, but simply as someone in need of help, and he had answered with no expectation of return. That kind of decency, she realized, had become rare in her world. The next morning came quickly. The office buzzed with scheduled meetings, marketing reports, and project deadlines. Isabel's assistant entered, clipboard in hand. "Any updates on the supplier meeting?" Isabel asked. "Yes, and also something odd. You left this note for yourself yesterday, find Luca." Isabel blinked. She had scribbled it on her notepad half absent-mindedly. "Yes," she said. "He's a young man, helped me yesterday when my car had a flat. No contact info, just his first name and maybe a general area." The assistant raised a brow. "That's not much to go on." "I know, but still try." The assistant hesitated, then nodded. "I'll ask around, but it might take time." As the week moved on, Isabel busied herself with presentations and travel planning. Still, the memory remained, his steady hands, the way he refused payment, the subtle sadness in his smile. Luca, meanwhile, had returned to routine. He spent his mornings helping the town baker, then cycled to neighboring villages for small errands. Mending fences, delivering parcels, or fixing broken chairs. Every euro mattered. His grandmother's medicine was getting expensive, and winter was nearing. He hadn't told her much about the encounter, just that he helped a woman with car trouble. She had smiled and said, "Good things come back around, my boy." But Luca didn't expect good things. He had learned not to. Yet, something about that moment had stayed with him, too. Maybe it was her eyes, tired but sharp, or the way she had said his name, like it mattered. He had helped people before, but this had felt different. For a few nights, he imagined what kind of world she lived in. Glittering offices, polished shoes, windows with views, a world he didn't belong to. Still, he was glad he'd stopped. That moment had felt great. Back in the city, Isabel's assistant returned after 2 days with a hopeful glimmer. "I asked some grocers and roadside vendors in the region you mentioned. One woman said a boy named Luca delivers food and helps her with chores. She described him. I think it's him." Isabel stood from her chair, heart skipping unexpectedly. "Get me an address." The assistant nodded and walked out. For the first time in weeks, Isabel felt something stir inside her, not obligation, not pity, but something warmer, as if the universe had handed her a thread of fate, and she was ready to follow it. The next morning was quiet. A soft drizzle had blanketed the city, tapping gently on windows and softening the usually sharp rhythm of everyday life. Isabel stood by her window, staring down at people with umbrellas crossing the street, their lives moving forward like clockwork. She took a deep breath and checked her phone. No urgent calls, no pending crises. For once, silence felt welcome. Her assistant knocked and entered with a folded piece of paper. "I have an address." Isabel turned. "You're certain?" "It's not much, just a name on the mailbox and a description that fits. Small house, outskirts of town." She took the paper, her fingers strangely tense. "Thank you." She didn't know exactly what she was planning to say, only that something about Luca's kindness had struck a chord. A part of her that had grown numb in the corporate grind, buried under years of deadlines, competition, and loss, had awakened. She spent the next hour thinking, pacing, deleting, and rewriting messages she never sent. Finally, she put on her coat and left. In a quiet street far from the rush of offices and cafes, Luca was sweeping leaves outside a neighbor's gate. It was one of those odd jobs he took pride in, not glamorous, but honest. He didn't notice the sleek car pull up until the door opened and high-heeled footsteps echoed softly behind him. Luca. He turned, broom in hand. The voice was familiar, but the face even more so. Isabel stood there, her expression somewhere between a smile and disbelief. "Madam?" he asked, unsure. She took a step forward. "I'm sorry to show up like this," she paused, "I wanted to find you." Luca blinked, dusting his hands on his shirt. "Is something wrong with the tire again?" A soft laugh escaped her, the first genuine one in days. "No, the tire's fine. I came because I didn't get a chance to thank you properly." "You already did," he replied, surprised. "Not really." She glanced around. "May I?" He nodded, leading her toward a bench near the fence. They sat, and for a moment, the drizzle painted silence between them. "I haven't been able to forget what you did," Isabel began. "Not just fixing the tire, but how you did it, without judgment, without expectations. That's rare where I come from." Luca looked away, uncomfortable with praise. "I only did what anyone should do." "Maybe," she said softly, "but most people don't." She paused, watching his modest clothes, his worn shoes, his unpolished grace. "You said you help around, that you do deliveries, fix things." He nodded. "Whatever puts food on the table." "And if you had the choice," she continued, "what would you really want to do?" He hesitated. "I don't know if it matters. Dreams don't pay bills." "Maybe not today," she said, "but tomorrow could be different." Luca didn't know what to say. He had lived so long in survival mode that imagining tomorrow as anything more than just another struggle felt foreign. She reached into her coat and handed him an envelope. "No tricks," she said. "Just read it later, and if you're interested, there's a number to call." Luca took the envelope gently. His fingers felt the weight, not heavy, but meaningful. Isabel stood. "I won't keep you. I only wanted you to know that your kindness didn't disappear into nothing." He stood too. "I never expected anything. That's exactly why it matters." She gave him one last look, warm, firm, full of respect, then walked to her car and disappeared into the light drizzle. Luca stood still for a long moment, envelope in hand, unsure if life had just given him a moment or a door. And somewhere deep within, something began to stir, uncertainty, hope, and the whisper of change. Luca sat on the edge of his bed, holding the envelope like it was made of glass. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the air cold and quiet. His grandmother, asleep in the next room, was breathing softly. The little home, with its peeling wallpaper and drafty windows, felt unusually still. He hadn't opened it yet, not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him hesitated. Life had taught him to be cautious with hope. It was a fragile thing, a thing that often showed up only to disappear again. But Isabel hadn't looked like someone playing games. She had shown up, not in a boardroom or behind a desk, but on his street, face to face, as if she genuinely meant what she said. And so, after taking one deep breath, Luca carefully unsealed the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, printed on crisp paper. The words were formal yet personal. It began with a thank you. Then came the unexpected, a formal invitation. He was being offered an apprenticeship. The letter explained that her company had a small but growing department focused on innovation and community initiatives. They needed minds with fresh ideas, people who understood struggle and saw the world through unpolished lenses. He read it twice to be sure. Then again. There was a start date, a contact number, and a handwritten note at the bottom: "You saw me as a person when I needed help. I see you the same way. Let's build something good together. Isabel." Luca placed the letter on the table and just stared at it. He didn't know what he felt: fear, disbelief, excitement, all of them at once. That night, he barely slept. 2 mornings later, he stood outside the company's headquarters, a building so clean and tall it seemed to touch the clouds. He wore his best clothes, a plain button-up shirt ironed twice, and shoes he had polished the night before until they shone like new. People in smart jackets and sleek trousers walked past him. He stood out, no doubt, but he kept his head high. At the front desk, a receptionist greeted him. "You must be Mr. Luca." He nodded, trying not to sound nervous. "Yes." She smiled and handed him a visitor badge. "Miss Isabel will see you now." He followed a staff member through corridors of glass and light until they reached a quiet meeting room. Inside, Isabel stood by the window, reviewing something on her tablet. She looked different today, less corporate, more human. A wool coat draped over the chair, her hair tied loosely. She turned and smiled warmly. "You came." Luca gave a small nod. "Still not sure if this is real." "Oh, it's very real," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "And it's not charity. I don't believe in that. I believe in potential. You have it. I saw it the moment you knelt by that tire and never asked for a thing." Luca looked down, trying to hide the emotion in his eyes. She continued, "This program isn't just about learning technical skills. It's about seeing how real stories can shape better ideas. We want to build things that make a difference, and I think you can help us do that." He looked up slowly. "I don't have degrees or fancy experience." "You have something better," she said, "heart, humility, perspective." He breathed out slowly. "Then I'll do my best." Isabel smiled, stood, and extended her hand. "Welcome aboard, Luca." As they shook hands, something passed between them, mutual respect, unspoken gratitude, and the beginning of something neither had seen coming. Outside, the sky was clearing. A new day had begun, not just on the calendar, but in their lives. Luca arrived for his first official day before anyone else. The morning light filtered through the large windows as he stood silently in the lobby, adjusting the collar of his now familiar shirt. It was the same one he wore the day he'd met Isabel again, washed and pressed, holding up under time and hope. When the elevator opened, he was greeted by a young man in glasses who introduced himself as Martin. "You must be the new apprentice. Come on, I'll show you around." The office was a world Luca had never imagined for himself. Glass walls, hushed conversations, coffee machines that looked like they belonged in museums, and people typing quickly with focus and polish. Martin showed him to a corner desk. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was his, clean, organized, and waiting. A small note on the keyboard read, "You belong here. Don't forget that." Isabel's handwriting. His chest tightened. The weeks that followed were not easy. There were moments he felt entirely out of place, when acronyms flew over his head, when he didn't understand a process or couldn't follow a digital presentation. But each time doubt whispered, another voice, quieter but stronger, reminded him why he was here. Not because of luck or pity, but because someone had seen something in him. He stayed late, asked questions, took notes by hand when no one else did, and slowly he began to find rhythm in the chaos. He surprised even himself. One afternoon, he was called into a creative strategy meeting. People tossed around phrases like social narrative alignment and community engagement funnels. Luca stayed quiet at first, unsure if he belonged at that table. Then someone asked about authentic storytelling. Luca cleared his throat. "I think sometimes we try too hard to sound smart and forget how people actually feel. If you want them to care, speak from where it hurts, not just where it looks good." The room went still. A moment passed. Then someone at the far end said, "That's exactly what we've been missing." After the meeting, Isabel approached him. "You spoke like a leader." "I didn't mean to," he said honestly. "That's why it worked," she replied, smiling. Outside of work, life shifted too. His grandmother's medicine became more regular. He moved her to a quieter, warmer place closer to the city. They still lived simply, but not desperately. On Sundays, they shared tea and stories, and she always reminded him, "I told you something good would come back around." Luca never forgot. Meanwhile, Isabel changed too. There was a lightness to her now, a softness in the way she greeted employees, a spark in her eyes when she walked past Luca's desk. People noticed. Rumors swirled. But the truth was simple, she had rediscovered something she'd forgotten she missed: connection. She invited Luca to help design a new initiative, a social outreach program led by people from humble backgrounds, aimed at inspiring youth in overlooked communities. The project bore his fingerprints, raw, honest, grounded. One late evening, as they reviewed the final proposal, Isabel looked at him. "You know," she said, "you've become more than I hoped." Luca smiled, tired but fulfilled. "You gave me the space to try." She looked at him, not like a boss or benefactor, but like someone proud of what they'd helped build together. They didn't need more words. Some journeys aren't about status or success. Some are about finding people who remind you of who you once were and who you still can become. A year had passed. The quiet young man who once cycled dirt roads with a toolkit strapped to the back of his bike now stood on a softly lit stage, buttoned into a tailored jacket, addressing an audience that filled the room wall to wall. Luca took a breath and glanced toward the seats. His grandmother was seated in the front row, hands folded in her lap, beaming with pride. Just beside her sat Isabel, poised yet radiant, her eyes never leaving him. Luca adjusted the mic. "A year ago, I didn't even know what an apprenticeship looked like. I didn't have a resume worth reading or a suit that fit. I only had the willingness to help and a flat tire I didn't cause." The crowd chuckled softly. He continued, "I didn't know that ACT would change everything, that someone would see something in me, something I didn't even see in myself. This project, this team, this life, it all began not with a plan, but with a choice to stop, kneel down, and help." He paused. And so, to anyone listening, wondering if small things matter, remember this: a single moment can shape 1,000. You just have to show up with heart. As applause rose and the lights dimmed, Luca stepped down from the stage. He didn't rush. He soaked it in, not the praise, but the path that had brought him here. Later that evening, the three of them, Luca, Isabel, and his grandmother, took a quiet drive out of the city. The sky had turned soft purple, the kind of color that only appeared when day and night shook hands. They followed the winding road until it opened into the countryside, familiar and still. He slowed the car and pulled over near a small bend in the road, the same spot, the place where it had all begun. They stepped out together. The breeze was gentle, brushing their coats like a memory. Luca turned to Isabel. "Do you remember it?" She smiled, her eyes misty. "Of course. I was angry, helpless, frustrated. And then you showed up, all dusty and polite, asking if I needed help. I almost didn't stop," he admitted. "I had soup in my bag and not much time." "Thank God you did," she whispered. They stood in silence, looking out at the quiet landscape. Luca spoke again, softly, as if more to himself than anyone else. "I think this place is proof that life doesn't always scream its turning points. Sometimes it whispers. You just have to be willing to hear it." His grandmother rested a hand on his arm. "And to answer when it calls." He smiled at her, full of gratitude. Isabel stepped forward and placed something in Luca's hand, a small, custom keyring shaped like a tire. On it, engraved in silver, were the words, "One good turn changes everything." He turned it over in his fingers and laughed quietly. "It really does, doesn't it?" She nodded. "It did for both of us." Luca looked around one last time. The trees, the gravel, the silence. Then he opened the car door and helped his grandmother in. Isabel followed. As the car drove off into the horizon, nothing looked different to the world. But for 3 people in that vehicle, life had come full circle, not with fireworks or fanfare, but with grace, gratitude, and the undeniable power of a small act of kindness returned tenfold. And somewhere behind them, the breeze whispered through the trees, carrying with it the quiet echo of the day.